What's up, everybody? We're back again with another piece of EOC review. This time we're still in ecology. We'll be getting at food chains, our biogeochemical cycles, which is like the water cycle, carbon cycle, nitrogen cycle, human impact on the environment, as well as renewable and non-renewable resources. Please keep in mind that this is just to kind of get us through our review. This is not meant to be a full explanation of any of these. This is test prep, making sure we're all aware of this. Let's see what we got. Zoom in a little bit. Use the following words to describe the relationships between producers and consumers. Keep in mind that producers, where's our annotations? Keep in mind that producers are specifically going to be things that are doing photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is going to be taking sunlight energy and bringing it into molecules, specifically glucose, as plants do photosynthesis. Other things do photosynthesis as well, such as certain types of bacteria or phytoplankton, some little single-celled guys that live at the surface of the ocean. But our producers, they're going to be the ones taking advantage of sunlight energy and then bringing that into the food chain for everybody else. Consumers then would be our individuals that have to consume or eat other organisms to get their energy. These guys make up the majority of the different organisms that are not plants and, you know, the rest of our producers. Let's see what we've got here. All energy in an energy chain or web is derived from the sun. What just happened? Let's try that again. Sun. Unfortunately, animals cannot use solar energy for our food sources. The blank or plants do this. This word is autotroph. Something to keep in mind. Autotroph literally means self-food. Troph or trophic level refers to where you fit into a food chain. Auto means self. They're going to be the ones producing food on their own. It's another word for producer. Plants take the energy from the sun and turn it into food through photosynthesis. And as animals consume the plants, the energy is transferred to them. Animals are known as consumers, mostly because we're not doing photosynthesis. Actually, they said consumers. We're supposed to say heterotroph. Hetero meaning other, troph again referring to where you fit into the food chain. So you're going to eat other things as your food because they have to consume their energy. Then as producers consume the blank, what? Then as predators, sorry, I read producers again. Then as predators consume the prey, that energy is transferred again. The process continues until the organism dies, and then a super important part that does not get very much talk is our decomposers. Our decomposers are going to be breaking things back down, releasing those molecules and energies back into the environment, and that can get taken up by plants or other things that live in the ground. Decomposers are super important. If we're looking at a pyramid like this for food chain or food web kinds of things, this would be this would have our decomposers on the side over here. I think they're going to have us label this here. Yep. Construct and label a food chain with 5 levels of organization. Okay. You can come up with a bunch of different animals if you wanted to, but they're wanting us to use our terms. Let's see what we can do. We have our producers. We have our primary consumer. Primary means first. Then we have our secondary consumer. And our third level or tertiary consumer. So if we looked at this, we would see the energy from the sun shining down onto our producers. who are going to be generating energy in the form of carbohydrates or glucose. Plants then get eaten by our primary consumers, and our primary consumers, once they eat those producers, will have the energy in them. The energy then gets transferred from our primary consumers into our secondary consumers, and the energy from our secondary consumers as they get eaten gets transferred into our tertiary consumers. Once a food chain gets to a certain length, it usually drops off. Food chains can't just be unlimited long. There's not enough energy passed along to make this happen. We'll talk about that in question 3. So once we get farther down the food chain and individuals from these other levels die, they're going to have their energy broken down by our decomposers. I can't spell. Decomposers. Messy writing. Our decomposers on the side here, which will then transfer it back into our system again. So decomposers playing an important role there. Things always start with producers because they're the only ones that can access the energy from the sun. And then it moves up through our various levels of consumers until they're broken back down again. Over here, question 3, what happens to the available energy as you move up the pyramid? You guys, we have something very important that you need to know about this. This is called the rule of 10%. This rule of 10% gives us the idea that as you go to the next step in a food chain, only 10% of the energy is available to that next level. So for example, if we had a food chain here, we have grass, and grass gets eaten by a grasshopper, and the grasshopper gets eaten by a snake. Well, that does not look like snake. Let's try that again. And snake gets eaten by a hawk. Well, let's make up some numbers here. If we had 1,000 units of energy in the grass, and that grass gets eaten by our grasshoppers, that actually means only 100 units of energy would have been available to these grasshoppers. The other 90% would have been lost as heat. So 10% of that energy made it up to the next level. And if the snakes ate the grasshoppers, there only would have been 10 total units of usable energy that they'd be able to get from there. The hawks would only be getting 1 as they continue to eat. What this tells us is if only 10% of energy is available to the next level, the closer to the beginning of the food chain that you're eating, the better. When people talk about eating vegetarian style or more vegetables and fruits and whatnot as being healthier, part of the reason for that is if you're eating stuff that is the plant or is from the plant, you're being that primary consumer, you're actually getting a larger portion of the available energy than you would if you were eating the cow that ate the grass. That would put you up here. You'd be getting 10 units of the 1,000 units of energy that was available in the grass. So the closer to our producers that you eat, the more energy you will end up with. But keep in mind our rule of 10%. Only 10% of that energy is available to the next level. So what happens on the way up the pyramid? There is less and less energy available. This would also tell us that we would have to have a lower number of hawks than snakes. If we had more hawks than snakes, what's going to happen to our snakes? I'm going to Dora the Explorer this. Ready? What happens to our snakes? That's right. They'll get eaten. Yeah, if we have way more of our hawks than snakes, they're going to end up eating all of the snakes. All the snakes die, which means that all the hawks will die because there's no food. And since all the snakes died, the number of grasshoppers skyrocketed because nobody was eating them. Then the massive number of grasshoppers eats all the grass, killing all of the grass, and then all the grasshoppers die and they're going to starve to death. So losing individuals in our food chain, big problem. Let's go back to our share. All right. Complete the pyramid to the right with the terms given. Okay. Oh, I guess I technically did two wrong. I kind of answered the pyramid question up here at two. Two wanted us just to make a food chain. This, that eats this, that eats this, that eats this, that eats this kind of a thing. That was 5 levels long. I'm sure you guys can come up with that. Think of some organisms that you know of. But yeah, producer, consumer, decomposers, we got those onto there. Our biogeochemical cycles. Label and describe the steps of the water cycle. Okay. I'm going to zoom in a little bit here to make it easier to write on. Let's see what we can do. You guys, here it says the hydrologic cycle. That's just telling us water. Hydro for water. Hydroelectric dam involves water, that kind of a thing. The only stuff you really need to know for our water cycle in reference to the EOC is roughly what all of the ways to move the water are called. So let's label some of these and see what we've got. That one over here, we've got evaporation, water going from a liquid to a gas. Up here with 3, we're going to skip 2 for a minute and come back to it. 3, we've got the water collecting in the atmosphere and coming together. This is called condensation. Condensation, water grouping up. Keep in mind, water's polar. So those positive and negative charges are going to pull them all together into bigger and bigger chunks. As the water gets heavy enough, it will eventually fall as rain. The rain or snow that comes down is our precipitation. Fairly sure you guys have heard these words before. As it hits the ground, it may come down into the ground. This is called percolation. Percolation is the idea that it soaks down through something. They used to call old coffee makers percolators. They would heat up the water and it would kind of dissolve its way down through the coffee grinds. And that's what actually put the flavoring into the coffee, or the water, I should say. From that underneath, we can have groundwater, which will eventually be, moving its way across our landscapes. If you think about digging a well, there needs to be water down there for you to be able to dig to. Here, coming down the hill at number 5, we have runoff. I don't think any of this is too new to you guys, but the reason that I left number 2 for now is I specifically want to highlight this because I feel like not only is this important, tends to be a question that gets asked a lot. Right here, we actually see a group of trees. One thing about trees are living or biotic. This is the only part of the water cycle that involves a living thing to make it happen. Because of that, this tends to get asked about quite a bit in reference to the water cycle. So this process here is called transpiration. Transpiration is when water evaporates out of the leaves of plants. The water would be escaping through the stomata, the little holes in the bottom of our leaves, and making it back up to the atmosphere. Now, it sounds weird that why would we give plants and trees water only for them to let it evaporate out? It helps with the suction and pulling more water through the plant. So sometimes letting some go kind of keeps the flow going. So transpiration is a thing that happens. Plants don't always want it to happen, but it can be helpful from time to time. But again, because this is the only part of the water cycle that involves a living thing, transpiration tends to be a question that comes up quite a bit. Whoa, what did I do? Am I missing another one? No, that's just what it looked like. Okay. I don't know why this feels like something's missing here. Okay. Describe the steps of our carbon cycle. You guys, carbon cycle. We've got a couple different ways to cycle carbon around through our systems and areas. So I'm gonna have to use annotations again. Let's see. So for our carbon cycle here, we have photosynthesis. I'd like to highlight photosynthesis on this one also. We give plants carbon dioxide. Well, plants take in carbon dioxide to be able to do photosynthesis. Notice that this is the only arrow that kind of points down are the ones that are coming down to our plants. These are going to be the ones of photosynthesis bringing our carbon down. Now, from our living things, keep in mind, we've got cell respiration happening from our plants and from our animals. Everybody's doing cell respiration. Once you make your food, you have to eat your food. So plants and animals both have mitochondria. They're both going to be doing cell respiration. In the cell respiration equation, we produce carbon dioxide and water and ATP energy. The carbon dioxide is what we breathe out, and that's what returns it back up to our atmosphere here. Down underground here, and I don't necessarily see this listed, but we have fossil fuels. We've got fossil fuels trapped down here underground. Those are going to get pumped up from the ground and actually burnt to get them back up into the atmosphere here. We also have things that are going to die and decay. When our decomposers break those guys down, that will also release carbon back into the soil as well as the atmosphere. So a couple different ways that carbon's going to get cycled around our system. It's usually photosynthesis and cell respiration, and then it's going to involve either decay or burning to break those molecules down. Now that we've got some info about our carbon cycle, if we scroll down a little bit, we've got some vocab here. All of these words are things that we talked about up above. Our ecological pyramid was the one we were looking at the 10% rule, as well as our producer, primary consumer, secondary consumer, tertiary consumer kind of a thing. You can see those guys listed over here. Biogeochemical cycles. Bio tells us life, geo tells us earth, and then chemical, it's how chemicals are moved around the earth. Carbon cycle, water cycle, we had autotroph, which is the same as our producers. We had heterotroph, which is the same as consumer. The difference between a food chain and a food web, let's talk about this quick because it's good info. If we're putting these two guys, a food chain is this guy eats this guy who gets eaten by this guy who gets eaten by this guy kind of a thing. This is a food chain and it shows one specific set of eating relationships. I'm sure that this guy who's organism number 2 probably has other things that it could also eat. But in a food chain, we're only looking at one set of feeding relationships. A food web gives us a better picture of the way an ecosystem would work as it starts to include things like, oh yeah, and that can also get eaten by this guy, and it brings in other things there, as well as gives more options for what they'd be taking in as their energy source. So food webs, better picture of the environment. If you just want an idea of what's going on, we could use a food chain, which shows one set of eating relationships. Also on here, we have this last one again, trophic level. Trophic level is the name of each step in a food chain. So this guy who eats this guy who eats this guy kind of a thing. Each step would be called a trophic level. One thing that I do want to make note of, if we're talking about a food chain or a food web and the energy is pointing at something, we are showing where the energy goes. Whichever way the arrow is pointing, it's showing you the energy is going from organism 1 into organism 2, meaning that organism 2 is eating or consuming organism 1. And we get down, I believe this is our last section here. Let's see what we've got. Human impact. Analyze the effects of these things and the way that humans or individuals impact the environment. Climate change. We hate to hear it, but we got to be real about it. Pollution is a huge issue. It's not just pollution that goes into our air, it's anything that makes it into our waterways. It's also things that just don't belong places. If we look at things like old broken down buildings, those things still count as pollution. Nature tries to take back over and we'll see plants and things grow into those areas, but that's a bit of an issue. That's not so great. We would also have things like we said, like water pollution, air pollution. There's even something called light pollution, which is where we've got light from our cities shining on areas that would normally be dark, like if it was next to a forest kind of a thing. Um, but climate change, we're looking at changes that we're making to the environment that's making a big enough deal that it's actually causing the system to run differently. We're affecting these types of things. Human impact on climate change cannot be understated. And we didn't do anything. Can't say we didn't do anything. Even if you think we didn't do much, the fact is it's still changing. And even if we're changing it a little bit, this could be significant. If average temperatures change by 1 degree, we don't think we're going to notice anything. But what we'd actually see is that's going to be a difference of more or less energy available in our atmosphere and the environment, which can speed up or slow down things like weather. It can change temperatures and get organisms who only live in certain temperatures to start moving to other areas because of the difference in temperature. We can see lots of things that can happen from this. So pollution is something that's definitely contributing to climate change as much as how we're rearranging things on Earth and where molecules are concentrated. We're affecting things, guys. We talk about greenhouse gases. We talk about global warming as far as energy getting trapped around the Earth, all those things. Environmental impacts with energy sources. Obviously, we have to bring up fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are a big source of pollution. And I mean, to be fair, they're a decent energy source. Like it's working well. We've been able to develop engines and cars and everything else off of this. So we're taking part in a lot of this. A lot of our machinery, big industrial stuff also takes advantage. We look at other energy sources like electricity. A lot of our electricity is actually generated from coal. We burn coal. The coal heats up water. The rising steam turns a wheel and generates electricity. So even though you're using electricity, we used coal to generate that electricity. That's a bit of a problem as well. Coal is another one of our fossil fuels, which can lead to the pollution and other issues. Also, the fact that to get it up out of the ground, we're tearing up our environment. We're potentially polluting other areas with oil spills and everything. Not so great, guys. They bring in policy making. This is kind of, we stop short of talking about policy a lot of times when we talk about the environment and pollution and things. Obviously, we want to try to make a move away from fossil fuels with the pollution and destruction that it's causing. There's a lot of policies that have been put into place, like you can get tax credits and things for owning an electric vehicle. There's tax breaks that are given to companies that are making hybrids and other electric vehicles. So there's a lot of that kind of stuff to try to support the use of things like that. There are some policies in place that have to do with things like solar power, wind power, and water power, and trying to make those more accessible or common in areas. There's also some negative stuff with that too. Florida's a big one. If you have solar panels, you're allowed to use as much solar energy as you want that you generate. But if you're wanting to sell that, you couldn't share it with your neighbor. Florida law actually has it set up to where you're required to sell it back to the power company. and the power company gets to set the price. We would have way more solar power down here if we didn't have laws like that limiting what we can do with that solar power and making it difficult for us to be able to use it. The power companies thought we'd be able to move on without them, so they got a bunch of legislation done that limited us with that, which is one of the reasons that we don't actually see more solar down here. It would make a whole lot more sense if we actually took advantage of that. So there are a lot of laws out there and things put in place to try to help us, and some of them don't help all that much. Lastly, we get down here to renewable and non-renewable resources. I mean, you're going to detect a theme here. Costs of non-renewable resources. We've got pollution. We've got destruction of land. With a lot of the non-renewable resources that we're using, we're going to be mining them or digging them up out of space, destroying the area that was there just to get at what was underneath. We've got impacts to health. As much as people say things like they like the smell of gasoline, there's a lot of cancer and other health repercussions just because we're around chemicals like this all the time. Let's be real, you shouldn't be anywhere near gas. If we didn't need it for our vehicles and things, you would avoid it for almost all of your life. Most people never would have been around it if we didn't have a need for it. So there are more things than just the monetary cost of getting at these. We've got loss of land. We've got death from animals and other things losing their habitats. We've got pollution. We've got issues with human health as well as other things. It's not just money. Sometimes we have to give up other things to get what we want, and here we are. What's the importance of using renewable energy over non-renewable? Well, other than avoiding all of the negative stuff that we just talked about, renewable energy is exactly that. Renewable can be regenerated. Being regenerated means that we're not going to run out. Even if it's something that might not be completely renewable, but partially renewable, where we still kind of have to spend some non-renewable energy, but we're getting benefit back out of this. You guys, anything we can do to start changing and shifting what's happening as far as what we're using and the destruction we're causing, the better. The carbon emissions and everything that we're dealing with, it's stacking up on us. And we will get to a point where there's not going to be a lot we can do about things. Once the plane is in its nosedive, it's really hard to pull it back out of that nosedive. We got to do things to try to help before it's too late. Renewable energy can also be much cheaper. I was looking this up earlier as far as the actual cost. And they said for fossil fuels, it would end up being about $60 per kilowatt hour. And with renewable energies like solar and wind, we can get it down to as low as $30 per kilowatt hour, which is about half of the actual physical cost by converting over to renewable energy. And by setting it up in major things like wind farms or like huge areas with a bunch of solar panels, we can actually maximize that and get it to be down to be even cheaper, which again, saving the earth and saving money sounds like a pretty good thing. Couple vocab words here, renewable and non-renewable. I think you guys are familiar with these. Sustainability, the ability to keep things going on into the future without running out or running out of things, is a goal. We may not make it completely there, but anything we do at least slows down the negative outcomes that would be in the future. You guys, that's the end of our last section here. Thanks for joining us for EOC review. Hopefully this was useful, and we'll catch you next time.